components that we haven't been doing for the last few months. There's going to have to be a recognition that a graded return to work, it's going to take some days, weeks or months.
With a kind of redoubled figure when actually that might be tricky for them.
You can see why employers would be saying, we haven't made any money in the last few months. We need to really catch up to make our year-end figures look good. I think there is a real danger in just assuming that you've got to make up for the 3 or 4 months that have been missed out, because we know that the support and stresses that people experience after challenging events are the strongest predictors of whether they go on to become ill or not.
Professor Neil Greenberg, my conclusions are almost too many to list. We've obviously been living through a concentrated human experiment, and as the results of it emerge, those that govern us and those that run our services must be responsive to what we learn from it. My thanks to George Hu, Helen Westerman, Bobby Duffy, Stephen Reicher and Neil Greenberg. We'll be back at the same time next week.
The briefing room was presented by David Aronovich and produced by Rosemary Jones. Now, Paul Lewis is here with what he'll be discussing on today's Moneybox Ball.
Thanks, E.G. Moneybox has learned that thousands of people will still be excluded from the job retention scheme, even though the government said the starting date had been extended by nearly 3 weeks. A scheme to make sure banks reimburse customers whose money has been stolen isn't working. Some banks are refusing almost every claim. And new rules this week will allow people to take payment holidays from car finance and payday loans. That's Moneybox in half an hour.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. Now on BBC Radio 4, it's time for From Our Own Correspondent. Here's Kate Adie.
Good morning. Today, religion versus restrictions. It's led to an almighty rift between the Orthodox Church and the state in Georgia. 75 years after the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was liberated by British troops, a survivor and our correspondent encounter birdsong and emptiness. First to Sri Lanka, still scarred by the 3-decade-long civil war between Buddhist Sinhalese and Tamils, which ended just over 10 years ago, since when the economy improved and tourism flourished. Then, last Easter, a group of Muslim youths, influenced by ISIS, murdered 270 people in a series of attacks. Jane Corbyn has been gauging the lasting effect 1 year on.
It's like paradise. White beaches, palm trees, and warm, hospitable people. No wonder Sri Lanka was a dream holiday of Sri Lankans. But it also changed the lives of 2 men from thousands of miles away, from London. One, caught up in the bombing of the Shangri-La Hotel, miraculously survived. The other lost a brother and a sister in the same hotel. Move beyond their own fear and tragedy to help the people of this island who suffered so much that day. I've spent years reporting the worst of humankind, the wars, the bombs, the famines and the cruelty. But unusually for me, this is a story that gives hope. Kiran Arasaratnam is energetic, brimming with ideas, passionate about his subject, technology and artificial intelligence. He's a professor at Imperial College London. Yet he arrived at Heathrow Airport as a child refugee, shivering in shorts and flip-flops in the depths of winter.
Please.
When he was 11, Kiran held his dying teenage brother in his arms. He'd been caught in the crossfire between insurgents and the army during the Civil War. His father sent Kiran away from Sri Lanka to save his life. A year ago, Kiran was only saved again, this time from the bombs in the Shangri-La, because he'd forgotten his bank card and returned to his room. The explosives were detonated in the restaurant and by the lifts as he was heading back down to breakfast. He stepped out into a scene of carnage. The whole air smelt of blood, the bombings. He returned to Sri Lanka with me, to face his demons, he said. We walked on the beach in Colombo, past fishing boats drawn up on the sand, as they were in the village during his childhood. Kiran described his plans to bring high-tech training to young Sri Lankans affected by the bombings through his charity, the Inspire Academy. In a cafe, we met 2 of his students. eager-looking young men, hoping to help develop their country. This island needs employment and opportunities for the young, especially now the tourist trade has been hit so hard by the bombings. And Kieran is determined to do what he can. This country has given me everything in my life, he said, and we can only overcome evil attacks like this one through education and empowerment. At the National Hospital of Sri Lanka in Colombo, doctors fought to save the lives of dozens of people that Easter Sunday. Among them, many foreigners, tourists staying in those hotels. Never came home. I walked through the corridors of the hospital with their brother David. He'd stayed behind in the UK to study for his university exams last Easter. We passed some rusting trolley beds out in the courtyard. The hospital is basic by Western standards, but it has dedicated doctors and great expertise in treating traumatic injuries after years of civil war. Amelie and Daniel were brought here, but doctors couldn't save them. The Lindsay family wanted to do something positive in their memory, and David's been fundraising in London. Together we look at the results and recover, as if something good comes out of something so evil. And now we've made the start.
Jane Corbin. I remember being played the recording of Richard Dimbleby entering Bergen-Belsen concentration camp when I was on a training course when I joined the BBC, and it remains one of the most remarkable broadcasts ever. Not only in its detailed observation and innate compassion, it was a revelation, as he carefully detailed the reality of the Nazis' final solution. So extraordinary that the BBC originally refused to believe it, until Dimbleby threatened to resign.
Finding a new route.
75 years on, his son Jonathan returned with Simon Broughton to the camp.
Standing by the gate now, it's almost impossible. Huge clearing in the woodland. This path was the main road through the camp. To the right were the buildings of the SS Guards, who surrendered the camp because